Hello everybody, my name is Maverick or Bammers. This video is going to be a deep dive into the class type of assassins. I believe it to be the most fun class type in the game. Its complexity is so deep that it makes what you can learn kind of just limitless. My hope with this video is simply to encourage new players to give assassins a try. It will cover everything from the absolute basics of character creation to more in-depth concepts like poison rotations, poison durations, resetting, and everything in between. While this video does have a lot of basics included in it, it is very complex and it will have tips for all levels of skill. I want it to be said that this video is going to be very long. It's more so meant to be digested in bits, almost as if you were reading a book, than to be done all in one sitting, as it's going to be very, very long and complex. There will be timestamps at the beginning as well as on the YouTube end of every major section, so you can always go back to certain sections that you don't understand or need more clarification on. I will also add my Discord tag, so if you do happen to have any specific questions, you can always message me on Discord and I'm happy to help out. It is important to note that race, while it does have an important stat contribution later down the line, it will not be a make or break for your character. There are plenty of people who can play, for example, a Kobold Shadowblade, which is Kobold being a high dex race, which has no valuable asset to a Shadowblade. They can still make it work at a very high level. While it will have an impact, it's not going to be what makes or breaks your character. That being said, if you are interested in the best, most optimal race options for each of the three realms, these are what I would suggest. For the Albion Infiltrator, I would suggest if you are going to play /spec, which is 100% dependent on your strength, Highlander is your best option. Whereas if you are going to be playing Thrust, which is 50% strength and 50% dex for your stats, Saracen is your best option. Inakanu is also very good, but Saracen is the best simply due to the fact that it has a base heat resist, which is really nice, being that assassins are naturally weak to heat. If you are going to be playing the Realm of Hibernia and therefore opting into the Nightshade class, your race options really come down to, if you're going to play Slash, you should be playing a Celt, whereas they will have the highest strength opportunities of the three race options, whereas if you're going to play Thrust, you should play Lurricane. While Elf isn't necessarily a bad option either for a Thrust spec, it comes down to Lurricane simply due to racial resists. Hibernian Leather is naturally vulnerable to crush damage, whereas Lurricane gains a base 5% natural resists under their race for crush resists. This makes them a better choice overall for the class if you're going to be playing Thrust. Lastly, for the Realm of Midgard, there's really only two choices, being that Midgard Shadowblade does not have access to a Thrust option. They only have access to Slash and Crush, which are both 100% strength dependent. Options like Kobold, Froststaff, and Valken, which tend to be very high dex races, just kind of fall way below the value of playing something like a Norseman or a Dwarf. Both of these options here are incredible. Your trade-off is going to come down to which you prefer more: 10 additional con out of the Dwarf, making you a little bit tankier, or 10 extra strength from the Norseman, which will make you hit a little bit harder. Now that we've went over what classes are on each of the three realms, you may be asking yourself, well, which should I play and why? What are the differences between the assassins that make them special or unique in some way or another? Let's go over that now. The main advantage of the Infiltrator over the other two assassin class types is the Infiltrator has access to more specialization points. It may seem like a minor difference, but it's a fairly substantial number of points by comparison, and it allows for the Infiltrator class to have a higher variety in specs and more useful tools gained out of your spec abilities, whereas other assassins may not be able to go as high in certain specs and it still be of value. The main advantage of playing Hibernia's Nightshade Assassin is their access to magic. No other assassin in the game has access to magic spells while still being able to play an assassin archetype except for the Nightshade. This is key for keeping the targets locked down from range, while also adding an initial burst of damage when needed. The last of the assassin archetypes, being Midgard's Shadowblade, has a very unique element, and it completely changes the playstyle of the class. Shadowblade's unique concept is a normal traditional assassin with access to two-handed weaponry. These weapons traditionally hit slower, yet hit very hard. Every class in Dark Age of Camelot has access to Realm Rank 5 abilities, a specific unique ability built around that class that's unlocked at hitting Realm Rank 5. Assassins are no different. For the Infiltrator class, you have access to the Realm Rank 5 ability Overwhelm. Essentially increases you a 15% bonus chance to hit the target. This has a high impact on classes like heavy defense classes like a warrior or a hero who have high parry and high block. For the Nightshade, you have access to Shadowstrike, which follows your opponent's movements very carefully, which redirects the force of their attacks. It's essentially a 10% damage mitigation ability that will also do a portion of that damage back to the enemy that you're facing. This is great for survivability in key moments while also adding a little bit more to your damage. Lastly, for the Shadowblade, you have access to the realm ability Blood Drinking. Each successful attack invigorates you, returning 45% of the damage you've done back to you as healing. This can be key for certain fights and guaranteeing longevity, as if you can consistently land big hits on a target and you're life leeching a large amount of it, you can sustain yourself a lot longer and potentially survive a lot longer. We are now past the more basic introductory level of the classes, and we are now going to start going into the spec options, realm abilities, and go a little bit more in depth as to what styles do, how they work, and the value placed on them. We are going to be covering the critical strike category first. This is the important, crucial class identifying abilities out of the critical strike line. There are some abilities and spec abilities, styles, etc. that are built into the class's identity that are absolutely necessary for all playstyles. That being said, an example of that would be Pincer Leaper. Pincer being a 4-second side stun ability that, when used on an enemy target, will stun them for 4 seconds and set them up for the follow-up being Leaper. Leaper is a massive decrease to the enemy target's absorption, which allows for you to hit significantly harder for future attacks. A reason this may be necessary is when fighting normally, a big portion of the way assassins are played is trying to maximize your damage while minimize your damage taken, as they do fall under a more glass cannon class type. It's important to note the value of these two abilities, as it's crucial to the class's identity, how it's played, and what style you should be going for at all times. If this debuff is not applied to a target, it should be your #1 priority. It should always be what you're attempting to land the entire fight. Landing this ability will be the determining factor on if you can win or lose fights on an assassin. It is that crucial to the class's identity. Based on my testing, I want to really emphasize the importance of Leaper debuff and how valuable it truly is. I can't completely say that I think the delve of the ability is wrong per se, but I do not think that it works how it's supposed to in terms of its percentage. The reason I say that is it's supposed to decrease the target's absorption by 3%. For a comparison, a leather wearer has 10% absorption. That being said, a 3% difference would be a pretty large cut to their absorption, being around 30%. Whereas against like a paladin who has a very high level absorption, 3% is negligible. It's very, very small. However, the difference is actually fairly consistent on how much increased damage you do across the board, rather it's on a cloth wearer or a plate wearer. Your damage will be lower, obviously, against a plate wearer, as other factors will decrease increase their survivability, but the damage difference on a percentage scale will be the same. Based on 100 hits tested across all armor types, across only factoring in main hand weapon damage, as I can't always guarantee an offhand hit, nor can I guarantee a crit. So excluding those external factors, excluding procs, on average, before leaper damage versus after leaper damage was a 65% damage increase. This is the numbers that I had came up with. Before leaper, I was averaging 181.5 damage on a main hand attack, whereas after leaper debuff, I was hitting for 278 average main hand attack. It's approximately a 65% damage increase on all armor types. So that's why I don't believe that the delve works exactly how it works, but I know for a fact that it is an absorption debuff, and this is an important keynote. We'll talk about weapon procs more in depth later in the video, but when it comes to weapon procs, you'll notice that I don't run any weapons that have an absorption debuff applied. The reason that is on the weapons that I use, if you have a weapon, for example, a Pick Slayer weapon that has a 20% or a 15% absorption decrease, that really sounds phenomenal. However, it will override Leaper, and even though Leaper's only delved at a 3% difference versus a 15% difference, the damage difference is incredible. Leaper hits significantly harder on a debuff than a Pick Slayer ever would, and the Pick Slayer debuff will, in the long run, consistently lower your damage output by a large amount simply due to that procking and breaking Leaper. That being said, there are also other abilities that are baked into the class identity. One of those being Perforate Artery, as well as Creeping Death. While these are not nearly as crucial as Pincer and Leaper, they are still very valuable spec abilities in the Critical Strike line. Perforate Artery is a frontal style that must be attacked through stealth, but it has a devastatingly high level of damage, and it is what has made the assassin class type so unique in essence for so long. Perforate Artery is an amazing introduction that will regularly hit for very, very high damage numbers, and it sets it up for the following being Creeping Death, which is a 7-second stun. Against certain classes, this can be what wins you a fight or loses a fight. You do have to be careful in landing stuns on certain targets, because every 1 second of a stun is 5 seconds of an immunity. So a 4-second stun from Pincer is a 20-second immunity, whereas a 7-second stun from Creeping Death, that being Perforate Artery's follow-up style, is a 35-second immunity. This can be amazing, or it can be very detrimental. Another important style to note is very similar to Perforate Artery. It's another ability that requires you to attack from stealth. However, instead of it being in the front, you are using what's known as Backstab 2. This is a very short duration stun at 3 seconds, but it does devastating damage, and it has an incredible follow-up style being Thigh Cut. Thigh Cut is just another very high growth rate style damage that can be phenomenal for starting a fight off, putting yourself in the lead by a large amount of life. This is what the style looks like. Another set of styles that's very, very important to understand the value of on an assassin is the Hamstring combo. This is another spec ability under the Critical Strike line. It is Hamstring and the follow-up being Achilles Heel. Achilles' heel has the same effect that Leaper does, but at a slightly lower value. It's still very good and it's great to land. You should be going for it, but it is never going to beat going for Leaper, so you should always prioritize Leaper. The way these absorption debuffs work, being that they're different values here, they do not work how you would assume. They do not stack, they coexist, and the higher value will always override. So for example, if you have applied Leaper to a target for 30 seconds, and then after you've Leaper debuffed them, you hit them with Achilles' heel, which is only 2%, a slightly lower value for that 30 seconds, it will keep the Leaper debuff for the full remaining duration at 3% until it fades, and then the remaining duration of Achilles' heel will take over. So if you had applied Achilles' heel 10 seconds after Leaper, you would have 30 full seconds of Leaper debuff at 3%, and then 10 seconds remaining of Achilles' heel debuff afterwards. This is how coexisting works within the game, and it's an important mechanic to understand. These debuffs do not stack, but they are both very valuable. One reason you still would like to use Achilles' heel is because it has a very high growth rate and can hit very hard, even if they're Leaper debuffed already. Another reason that Hamstring is so good is because it has a pretty large amount of an attack speed reduction, and it's a great way when fighting certain classes to keep them attack speed reduced or ASR'd, and allowing you to survive that much longer in a fight. This is one of the best and easiest ways to maintain an ASR on an assassin, being Hamstring, as it's an evade style. Assassins at base have a very high evade chance, so it's very likely to get this style off throughout the duration of fights. The last major style worth covering in the Critical Strike line isn't a style that you often have access to on a lot of specs, but there are a few that run it. If you spec 44 Crit Strike, you have access to the ability Stunning Stab. Essentially the way it works is it's a rear style that is a 6-second stun. You can use Stunning Stabbed while stealth, but it is not required. It is a 6-second stun, which is very handy for setting yourselves up for long damage combos. A use case for it would be if you know the enemy target has already used Purge and they are getting low on life, but they still have Ignore Pain up, you can swap to Mezz Poison anytime the target to set to Mezz them, run through them, use this long stun, and then kill them in a stun, knowing that they can't Purge, while you have a 6-second opportunity to kill them. It has its use cases that can be very strong. It's also great for the obvious reasons of an enemy target just running from you. Gives you an easy opportunity to land a rear stun and set yourself up to kill them. It is a great ability, but it is something that's typically overshadowed by having higher offhand specs, and in a lot of cases you won't even find yourself running it. But when you do, it's an amazing ability to keep in mind. Now that we have covered the Critical Strike line, let's cover Dual Wield. This is a spec line exclusive to the Albion Infiltrator. Now, I will also show Celtic Duel, which is the Hibernian version, as well as Left Axe, which is the Midgard version of Dual Wield spec. Very important style is going to be the Flank Chain. This is going to be, if you play an Infiltrator, your highest damage output style chain you can run once a target has been Leaper debuffed. But the most important part is getting that Leaper debuff off first. So a combination would be Flank, which is a side snare. This is what it looks like. And the follow-up being Shadow's Reign, which is another massive ASR, which again will help keep you alive while also doing lots of damage. If you happen to play Slash spec on an Infiltrator, this will be your #1 most common form of an ASR, as it's the only ASR that you can hit without requiring an evade to do it first. An example of this would be if you want to make sure you get an ASR on an enemy tank before he stuns you, this would be the way you would do it, because if you're relying on the evade, you're more likely to mess it up and him hit you before you get the evade off. Now he's not ASR'd. A combination for this would be Pincer Leaper, there's Pincer, there's Leaper, then you would do Flank, then you would do Shadow's Reign. And that combination right there would be one of the highest damage combinations you can run on an Infiltrator. Okay, lastly, this is the last major spec abilities around the dual wield spec line. This being Shadows... Oh wait, I don't have it on this character. That's awkward. Reflection and Hypnotic Darkness is the combination. I am not running a high enough spec to utilize it, but what it does is Reflection is an evade style. So this is a case where the target's already ASR'd and you're wanting to land a long stun to go for a kill. Keep in mind, every 1 second of a stun is 5 seconds of immunity, which means if you land this combination and you land a 8-second stun on a target, they will be immune for a very long time, and therefore you're much more likely to get caught out without having a way of getting them off of you or keeping yourself alive. It's a 40-second long immunity. So use this sparingly. Generally, the way people like to use it is when they've seen the enemy target purge. Once their purge is down and they have no way of getting out of a stun, you fight them until they get to like 30 to 40% life, then land this stun chain. It's a almost guaranteed kill because they're not going to be able to live 8 full seconds when they're already such low life, and it's a way of securing kills. This would be Reflection, which you evade off of. This, another really nice advantage of this is the evade style itself decreases the target's armor factor, making them take more damage with a hit, and the follow-up being a stun, so now they're taking more damage, their leaper debuffed, their armor factor debuffed, and now they're just going to get hit really hard for a 8-second stun. It's a great kill secure tool. Shadowblade has some unique abilities on it, but most of them are very similar to the other assassins. For example, the critical strike line is identical across all 3 realms. There are no differences between any of the abilities or styles in this entire spec line, so it's very easy to follow them from assassin to assassin. Generally, the same thing applies with their offhand spec abilities. Not always, but most of the time it's identical. In this case, the left axe spec has no flank chain or equivalent of a flank chain that does super high damage where it becomes a priority of use. Generally, you're only using the left axe spec line on Shadowblade for your evade stun. That being the styles Comeback and Frosty Gaze. Now on Shadowblade, you do not have the action of going slash or thrust. On Alb and Hib, you have access to slash thrust or slash pierce on Hib, but on Midgard, you're stuck with only doing slash damage type. That being said, you do have the option of going axe or sword. I generally would always suggest sword, as I think the styles are just objectively better, and the utility gained out of sword weapons is significantly higher. There's just better options, it's simple as that. Across all 3 assassins, the main hand spec line is pretty much the same with a few minor exceptions. The biggest reason that the sword spec is spec to a certain level ends up being for their anytime spec. This is one of the reasons that the Albion slash Infiltrator is so good, as you get your slash anytime style at level 29, so you don't have to spec as high as you gain higher realm rank. In this case, on Shadowblade, the slash sword version is Polar Rift. It's a fantastic style, but it is unlocked at level 34, so 34 becomes the minimum sword spec. When it comes to speccing, you're really shooting for composite 52 to maximize your weapon skill. As you can see on this Shadowblade, I'm realm rank 11, and I have plus 11 in my template. So in this case, I have plus 21 to sword spec. Generally, if I'm only shooting for composite 52, I'm 3 points too high, and in theory, I should drop my sword spec a little bit more. However, because I need a minimum of 34 sword spec to get access to Polar Rift, this would be the reason that I'm spec'd 34. Another keynote ability in the sword spec line for the Shadowblade is Rush. It's a very simple ability. It's just a 15-second side snare. As I mentioned earlier on the Infiltrator, it is a very useful tool to just get a snare and run away. It's useful for kiting, it's useful for resetting fights, it's useful for all kinds of instances, and if you're running with a partner, it's one of the best abilities you have for peeling for them. As I mentioned earlier, Shadowblade does not get access to Pierce. However, while it does lose access to that entire spec line, it does have a very unique concept in that it has access to the ability Bludgeoned. Basically, the way this works is it just turns whatever melee damage type that you are currently using, which in this case is Slash, into Crush damage. It's not Pierce, but it does give you a secondary damage type that you can use when fighting certain classes to maximize damage output. For Hibernia, the Celtic duel line is quite unique as well. There are some really good abilities in here, and then there's some not so great abilities. The general reason people like to spec Celtic Duel is for the higher chance to get their offhand to hit, but at level 44 it does give you access to a really good evade stun, that being a 7-second 2-part evade stun, very similar to the dual wield spec on Albion. You do also have access to a really long duration side snare. It's called Solar Flare, and this is what it looks like. It does have its use cases for kiting. If you need to kite away, you can use the side snare, as it's a longer duration than just a poison. Meteor Shower is another common ability that's used. I am not using it as I am pure spec, but if you are slash, it's a very strong anytime style for a slash spec. Outside of that, the only other use case would be Snow Shower, which is just the frontal ASR that everyone gets. It's not great, but if you are Pierce and you're playing the high Celtic Duel version of Pierce, it is your only form of an on-demand ASR. The Shadowblade's offhand spec is completely different than the other two. An important keynote: the way the Infiltrator and the Nightshade's offhand spec works is every 1 point that you put into those specs increases the chance that your offhand will hit by 0.5%. So at 50 spec points into it, you have a 25% chance for your offhand to attack. Shadowblade's left axe spec line is not like that at all. It's completely unique. Left axe, however, will always swing no matter what, but the damage of that left hand swing will be significantly lower, and it scales up based on the number of points you have in left axe. So if you were to run, say, 25 Celtic Duel or Dual Wield, and you land a style, and it happens to hit your offhand, that offhand will hit very hard on those classes. Whereas on the Shadowblade, every swing will land a hit with your offhand. That being said, the damage of the offhand will be significantly lower if you're also running 25. There are some perks and some negatives to this. In my experience, that means it's not really worth speccing super high left axe, as most of your damage comes out of your two-hand anyway, so I much prefer to run lower left axe and just use it for the styles that are of value and keeping your two-hand damage as high as possible. Being that your offhand will always hit though, it does mean you have a very high chance for your procs to fire off of an offhand weapon. So that's a great way of increasing, or what we call fishing for procs, as to set up massive damage combos. A couple of valuable styles within the spec line is Doubler. It is another form of a frontal ASR that all the assassins have access to in their dual wield line. It's not great, it's just a frontal style that does a low delve ASR. It is useful if you have no other form of an on-demand ASR, but it's not it's not going to carry a fight. Now the big styles that people typically spec left axe for is Comeback, and its follow-up Frosty Gaze. This is a 7-second evade stun. It's similar to the Dual Wield's 8-second evade stun in Alb, or the Nightshade's Celtic Duel evade stun, which is 7 seconds as well. The big advantage to this is, as you notice on those other two, you have to spec 44 points into their offhand spec line to gain access to the evade stun, whereas on Shadowblade you only need 29. This does free up a lot of other utility styles that you gain from other specs because you don't have to spec as high in left axe. Okay, I'm now moving on to the Envenom Spec line. This is the most important spec line, in my opinion, that the class has. This is what separates an assassin from every other class. It's stealth and venoms. A lot of people don't understand how important the Envenom spec line is and what it truly does. I want to discuss all the poisons in depth and the value behind all of them. Generally speaking, most assassins play 49 Envenom, and that's the lowest that they will run. You can run 50, and there's nothing wrong with it if you do, but the minimum you need to run is 49 across all assassins all the time. This gives you access to the highest value of all the most important poisons. Going down the list in order, Swordbreaker is a massive form of damage reduction for yourself. It's a way of keeping yourself alive, and it's very, very valuable. The way it works is it's a flat 20% melee and magic damage reduction. This has just been recently changed from 15% in one of the previous patches, and they added the 20% magic. So classes that you're fighting that are half and half damage type, for example, if you're playing a Nightshade and you're fighting a Reaver, or if you're fighting a Veil Walker, or a class along these lines that does large amounts of melee but also large amounts of magic, Swordbreaker can absolutely gut them, as it can do so much for keeping yourself alive. Swordbreaker is a very powerful poison that you can swap to and utilize when needed. A case where Swordbreaker would be useless is a class that doesn't actually do any melee damage at all, and you don't expect them to get casts off. So an example of this would be if a caster is running straight at you and you were to hit them with a PA, Perforate Artery, and then a Creeping Death, and then a Pincer, and a Leaper. In this case, your expectation is you're trying to kill them in a stun, in which case they're never going to get a cast off and they don't do melee damage. So in this case, a Swordbreaker poison would quite literally be a useless poison option. The next poison I want to go over is the Lethal Venom, also known as the Lifebane, I believe it is. Yes, Lifebane poison. Lifebane is also the level 50 version of it. It's the higher Delve version of it. This poison has its use cases, but it's the least valuable of the poisons by a long shot, which is why no one runs, or why 50 spec Venom is okay, but it's not necessary, as the only thing you gain out of speccing 50 versus 49 is the higher Delve, Lifebane. The reason it's not great anymore is it's been nerfed over the years multiple times. It used to be a double ticking poison where you had a body element and a matter element, both of which doing a large amount of damage. Combination with that, you would spec the Viper Realm ability, which increased your poison damage, and you would stack dot damage essentially. That's kind of been nerfed quite a bit now. They removed the entire element of the Lifebane poison, and its damage now isn't bad, but it's not incredible either. Generally, the case where you would want to use this is as a follow-up poison when you're trying to kill someone as quick as possible, and your expectation is you're never going to want to reset on this target. Resetting is just a way for you to get out of the fight when it goes bad. A case like I just mentioned previously would be that same caster walking at you, where Swordbreaker wouldn't be of any use to you. A dot poison would be, as your goal is just to kill them as quick as possible within a stun, and that extra 300 to 400 damage you gain from the dot could absolutely impact that. The next poison is, in my opinion, the most important poison by a long shot. This is your best poison in all use cases, at the very least as your initial poison. This is Touch of Death. It is the MVP of poisons. For both melee and caster, it is fantastic. Primarily melee, though. It's a survivability poison more than anything, but it doesn't ever hurt because it does decrease their constitution by 30, which is a pretty substantial amount of hits that they lose. So the advantage of this poison is its duration lasts very long. It's a 30-second long poison. A case again where this would be valuable is, as we just discussed with that caster, you could do a PA starting with Touch of Death as your poison, and then as soon as you hit that PA, you could swap to, for example, your Lifebane or your Lethal Venom for the purpose of killing that target as fast as possible. That would be an instance where Lifebane is of value, as well as Touch of Death is great because it's a very long-lasting poison that will also decrease their constitution. That is one element of the poison, but it's not the reason people love it so much. The reason the poison is so incredibly valuable is it has a 21% weapon skill cut. Weapon skill is a stat that's determined by your strength and your dex, as well as your spec points into a spec line. As you can see on my assassin, my weapon skill is 1715. Which means a 21% cut would be a massive cut to my weapon skill. This is effectively a huge damage reduction for anyone trying to do melee damage to you. A 21% weapon skill cut would be a large amount of damage reduction, and it helps you stay alive significantly better while also adding the Constitution debuff, making them squishier for you. So it's a great double use case. The biggest advantage is that it's a 30-second duration, so it makes it much easier for you to drop multiple poisons in a fight if you start with it. If you PA with Touch of Death, it lasts 30 seconds, you could swap to another poison, and it's still active for in a long enough duration for you to land a third poison swap on it before needing to swap back. It's a very, very valuable poison, and I cannot put enough emphasis on how valuable of a poison this is. This is your best poison by a mile. The next poison to cover is Widow Venom. Essentially, it just decreases the enemy's magic or melee resistances by 5%, which is great for you as a melee damage user. It's a form of free additional damage, while also decreasing their strength by 25, which is also fantastic. Cutting their strength decreases their weapon skill, decreases their damage output against you if they're a melee class. Another very valuable stat reduction. And more than anything, it also applies a disease, which disease makes them 15% slower and cuts their healing by 50%. This is incredibly valuable against certain classes. For example, classes that are going to try to kite you, it's an additional form of a snare. A disease will also mean that potions won't heal them as much. Cases where people have to use realm abilities to stay alive or charges to stay alive, those items will be cut in half. Cases where a class can naturally heal a lot. For example, if you were playing a Nightshade or a Shadowblade and you were fighting a Friar, for example, a class that in essence is not very tanky, but its sustain is through its healing, something like Widow Venom is detrimental by a long shot to them. It would really, really cripple their ability to survive as you're cutting their healing in half. This is another another poison combination that lots of people like to use, where if you're expecting the creeping death stun to be be a kill force, what you can oftentimes do is open with Touch of Death being your weapon skill con debuff, instantly swap to your dot poison, then go for Pincer and Leaper, and if you're quick enough on the timer, you can actually swap right back to Widow Venom right as the stun ends. So in the event that you're PAing someone who has a realm ability like IP, or they're planning on popping a potion right after to try and stay alive, all of these things you can help mitigate that with that disease. And being that your other poisons last so long, you're able to push through that initial boundary of getting that disease off before they can utilize any other sustain toys. It is a very valuable poison. It's one of those cases where in certain fights it can be an MVP, and other fights it's a lot less useful and it's not super important to utilize. But another advantage of it is a 15-second duration, with Touch of Death being 30 and Widow Venom being 15. You have a fairly long duration on how long you can utilize poison swaps. It's very, very valuable in that way. The second to last poison I want to cover is Shadowbind. This is the poison that regularly gets nerfed and people cannot stand. It's been nerfed multiple times now, where it's not nearly as valuable as it used to be. That being said, it is still a very strong poison, and in some use cases will absolutely win you fights. Essentially, the way it works is it makes it to where any form of an attack that you attack on an enemy will snare, and that snare percentage being 60%. The snare lasts 9 seconds, which means from the moment that snare is applied, the 60% snare starts to fade. It will not be 60% for 9 seconds. It'll be 60% at the first second, and then it'll slowly fade down to 0% from that original point. Cases where this is still super valuable, though, is one, if you're fighting people who are moving around a lot and are heavily reliant on landing positionals, it can be a way for you to prevent them from getting to your side by slowing them down. That's an amazing asset of the Shadowbind poison. Another case where it's super valuable would be through simply trying to get away. If you're at risk of death, if you apply snare poison, you can hit a target and just run away. And now it's much harder for them to get to you. You're able to get distance, you're able to re-stealth, do whatever you need to do to survive. And in a lot of cases, that will keep you alive. An important keynote in a more recent change to the snare poison. In the past, you would be able to snare someone, swap off of the snare poison, use another poison for a little bit, and then when you needed to snare again, you could always just swap back to it. This is no longer a element of the class, as in a recent patch they changed this. Now, as you can see up here in my bar, there is a immunity timer for how long you have to wait before you can switch back to snare. What this means is if you're going to snare, you need to plan ahead in your fight that you're not going to need to snare again for a certain time frame. It is a 30-second reuse. So 30 seconds before you're able to snare a target again, that's an important keynote in how you play the target. However, if you never swap off snare poison and you stay on it, you can utilize snare as many hits in a row as you want. The important thing is to notice when you swap to another poison, that's where it will brick your snare for 30 seconds. The last major form of a poison that's important to note is tranquilizing poison, which is your Mezz poison. This poison is another very valuable asset that's used in a lot of different ways. Some use cases for it is simply to just run away. If you're in a bad situation where you're looking at death, you can swap to it the poison, which is this animation right here, and then hit the target, which will AoE Mezz everyone around it in a 500 radius for 10 seconds. This allows for you to Mezz that target, run away. Your Mezz or your re-stealth timer is 10 seconds, so as soon as the re-stealth is available, the Mezz will end, so you're very likely to get away off of the Mezz reset. That being said, another very valuable use case for the Mezz poison is if you're getting someone low life and you're trying to sort of secure a kill. A lot of times what you can do is if you know you're 20% life, they're 20% life, and you're trying to stall out a stun timer, you can swap to Mezz poison, hit the target, and then wait out a few seconds so that you can re-stun the target so that you're not taking that damage for that extra 5 to 10 seconds while you wait on a stun. This is a great way of stalling a fight when needed to survive. Another use case is if you are a group runs over you while you're stealthed. A lot of times what you can do is you can swap to Mezz poison, hit the group of enemies that's around you, which will Mezz them all before you hit vanish, which will allow you to get away, but it'll also allow them to not be able to look for you for 10 full seconds, which gives you a very long distance you're able to get away from them before that comes out. This covers all the poisons in a fairly simplistic way and some of their major use cases. Next up, I want to discuss resetting and dot management. I mentioned earlier that the Lifebane poison and or the lethal venom poison has its uses, but can also be a real thorn in your side. A big way that assassins will survive is whenever they're fighting a target, they'll regularly use either a snare poison, like this, to snare the target and run away, or they will use a Mezz poison to Mezz the target and then run away. And this allows for them to either first aid to heal up, get out of range of the enemy and just use CL heals abilities to heal up, use something like that to stay alive. And they'll use resetting commonly when they get toys. Say for example you're fighting a light tank like a Battlemaster. In this fight, he purged on your first pincer you used. After he blew that purge, you then knew for the rest of the fight, it's very hard for you to die. Because with the exception of charge, you can always just Mezz him when you get low life and run away. However, you found that while you're fighting, you're getting to about 40% life, and you just got him to use IP. Now he no longer has IP for 15 minutes, and you're 40% life. Out of fear that he might charge and try and kill you in a charge, you can use Mezz poison to run away, and once you start running away, you can reset to full HP. Now you're full HP and he's full HP just like the last fight. However, in this case, you can then open with a Perforate Artery knowing that he doesn't have Purge, getting that 7-second creeping death stun, getting him super low life. Now he doesn't have IP since you got it out of the previous fight along with Purge. So now with that reset, you've restarted the fight from the very top while you still have all of your toys available and he's used IP and Purge. This is a super useful tactic for survival and killing classes that you really shouldn't be able to kill. Generally, you'll find yourself resetting the most against hybrids, light tanks, and heavies. Most casters you won't need to reset against unless they used Mog. Now that we've discussed the basics of resetting and what it does, how it works, it's important to note how how to prevent yourself from hurting yourself down the line. So I want to keep in mind that if you happen to use dot poison on an enemy that you're fighting, you'll notice that it does a damage over time, which is what a dot is. Through the duration of the fight, it's just constantly attacking him. Well, say you are fighting and you realize that you're kind of hurting and you need to reset. So you swap to Mezz Poison and you hit that target. As you walk away, that dot ticks and it breaks his Mezz. So now he's back, already coming back after you. Whereas had you not applied that dot, you would be fine. As you play the classes, you'll learn when it's okay and when not to use your dot poisons. However, where it can be a little tricky and where I see a lot of even experienced players mess up is using bleeds. I've seen a lot of cases where people will even use Perforate Artery on an enemy, not realizing that Perforate Artery actually has a low ticking bleed on it. And not realizing that just in a few seconds when you need to reset, if you haven't fought him for at least 20 seconds, they still have a bleed attached to them. This can be very detrimental in a reset, so you do want to be very cautious about that. Same thing applies to Backstab. The nice advantage though is that Backstab doesn't actually have the bleed, it's the follow-up. So you can still use the devastating damage type of Backstab while not using the full combo. While bleeds can screw you over in the sake of resetting, they're not all bad. One of the best use cases for bleeds, and you'll see lots of experienced solo players use bleeds intentionally, because it will prevent natural health regen through the duration of a fight. It is very useful and it does have its use cases that are very, very strong. You just need to be very cautious as to when you use them and how you use them. The stealth specialization is a very simplistic one, but it's very, very valuable. The concept is very simple. You're relying on getting 50 stealth. 50 stealth is maximized stealth for your ability to see other enemies around you, as well as be invisible to those around you. I am currently 40 stealth plus 9, as you can see right here in my stealth composite. As you gain realm rank, every single realm ability will give you +1 to your respective skill ranks, all of them. So in my case, the moment that I hit realm rank 11 on this character, I will be composite 50 stealth. This was something that I was hoping to gain out of this for maximizing my skill points and where I was going with them. I'm okay with running 49 composite. However, I would highly suggest anyone, especially newer to stealthers, should run 50. That being said, when you spec stealth, a minimum spec that you should spec is 40. You can run plus 11 in your template and then run plus from your realm abilities, and in theory you could run as low as like 29 stealth, which would save you lots of points. However, there are abilities that you gain in the stealth tree that are super important. The only one that really matters is 40 stealth. That gives you access to Blur. Blur is a very interesting ability that works in a lot of different ways and has a lot of different use cases. The primary use case though is gap closing. If you, for example, are fighting an archer who uses Zephyr or uses a stun or something to get you away from them, and now you're worried about this archer who's from me to this target right here away shooting at me, I don't want to eat the damage that I would have to take while I ran to that target. That would be a case where you would use Blur, which instantly puts you on top of the target. It's a very, very valuable tool, and it can be used multiple times in a fight, as its reuse timer is only 1 minute and 30 seconds. So in a lot of cases, when utilizing it properly, it can be a great way of staying on top of people and maximizing your damage when needed. Another very valuable use case for the Blur ability is defensively as well. While it does have its obvious uses in gap closing against enemies, you can also use it for gap closing away from enemies. For example, say you were fighting this wizard right here, and for some reason you thought you were at risk of dying. A better example would be if it was a melee, but a melee class and you're at risk of dying here, you can actually use Blur defensively by targeting another player. It has to be a physical player, but if there's a player in the vicinity, you can also blur to that player away from the target to get yourself distance for survival. It's another very valuable use case of Blur. Another important keynote around Blur is height. So while I can blur to someone at this distance, if they were on the same level as me, I cannot blur up to the enemy. you'll still see the same animation, but the actual character will not be able to be blurred to, and it'll say something in chat. So you'll see the animation, and I can spam it, but in chat it'll say you are too far below your target. That being said, there are some cases where even though I can't hit it, if you jump, you may actually get into a point where you're in range. Another very important note on how blur works is its utilization in keep fights. You can see in this keep, we own this keep, but it doesn't matter who owns it, that there's an inner keep and an outer keep. If you are inside of the courtyard or inside of a position where the inner keep is close by, it will not let you blur. So as you can see right here, this is a character that I'm trying to blur to. It will give me the error message in chat, cannot blur near an inner keep or onto yourself. While you can see this is still the same keep, just no longer down near the inner courtyard, I can still utilize the blur ability so long as I'm not near that inner courtyard. I can still blur within keeps, I just can't blur when I'm near the inner portion of the courtyard or inner keep. That's the important discrepancy. On the subject of blur, the way blur works is when you utilize the ability, it will place you on top of the target you are blurring to, directly on top of them, so landing a positional can be very, very inconsistent. That being said, if the target is running in any direction and you blur to that target, being that they are moving and it places you where they are, it will oftentimes allow you to be right behind them, so sticking that target gives you an ample opportunity to land a backstab for an easy opener on a hit. It's also important to note that blur can be affected by near sight. It is a pretty decent range that you can blur to an enemy target, however near sight is affected, so you can absolutely get caught into a position where you are nearsighted, need to blur to a target, and can't. The last point to discuss about blur is the ability to blur through windows. Now, as we discussed earlier, you can't do this near inside of keeps, as there is a blur mechanic that prevents you from being able to blur into an inner keep. That being said, as you can see in this clip here, you can absolutely blur through a window if there's a target available to blur to. This can get you inside of towers where it makes it eligible for a flip or to just kill multiple people while you're inside. The next major ability that I want to talk about is Shadowstrike. It's a class unique ability to assassins. You charge up an attack on an enemy. You have to target an enemy within a certain range of you, and then once you have chosen to Shadowstrike that target, you must sit still for 10 full seconds, and that target not leave your initial radius, and then it will automatically jump to the target and perform Perforate Artery on them. It's important to note that it's always Perforate Artery no matter what. It will not ever use a backstab, it will not ever use pincer, it will always open with Perforate Artery. This can be extremely useful in cases where an enemy is utilizing terrain to block off their frontal view, but you still want to go for a Perforate Artery. Specifically in tower fights or keep fights where they're utilizing keep walls to block off their ability to get PA'd, you can still Perforate Artery through the use of Shadowstrike. Shadowstrike also has a similar component to the way blur works, where there is a vertical requirement. If a target is too far above you, it simply won't let you blur to the target and will just give you an error message in chat. Another key point that I want to bring up about the Nightshade class is the way stealth spec works and what's gained out of it. As I mentioned at the beginning of the video, the advantage of playing a Nightshade is access to magic while you do damage. That magic is baseline, so you don't actually have to spec for it, but it falls under the stealth category. As long as you spec level 50, you'll have access to all the level 50 tier magic damage. That being said, a lot of people ask, well, how does the magic damage scale? Is there a specific stat that I need to build around to make my magic damage hit harder? The answer to that is no. You do not need to build any form of specific stat, as the spells off of the Nightshade work in the same way that a Caster Mauler spells work, where they don't have a direct scalable damage stat. Instead, the only way to increase the damage of them is by casting them faster. Generally speaking, you're not casting that often on Nightshade, and it's mostly your instant magic damage that you're using for your extra damage spike. You're only really casting in maybe 1/5 of fights, 20% of fights. It's not a key note, and it's definitely not worth putting the extra effort in to try and hit cast breakpoints on it. That being said, if you do decide to play Pierce, especially as a Lurkeen, you will most likely hit very high dex breakpoints, and you will be able to cast them pretty quickly. Starting with the Thrust Infiltrator, I believe there's only one real spec you can run. You need 39 Thrust to have the highest Delve ASR, which is a great way of surviving. 43 Dual Wield gives you the highest chance to land a hit with your offhand that you can feasibly run, which will increase your damage by a good margin. 49 Venom, 40 Stealth being necessities, and then 34 Crit Strike allows you to have Perforate Artery into Creeping Death along with your Pincer Leaper chain. This kind of gives you everything that you need outside of having the 8-second evade stun, which you're trading off by running Thrust. For the Slash Inf, there's actually two very strong specs you can run. One that I'm calling a Crit Filtrator. This just slightly focuses a little bit more on the critical strike element rather than having so much focused on dual wield. The spec is pretty much identical outside of that difference. I would highly suggest you run the Crit Filtrator build if you're a little bit lower realm rank, as the higher slash allows you to hit your composite 52 a little bit easier. The Merc Filtrator spec option only really works if you're super high realm rank to allow for you to get it. In this, you have 44 Dual Wield, which gives you access to the 8-second evade stun chain. You have 32 Slash, which gives you access to your anytime style that's very good, being Amethyst Slash. 39 Crit Strike gives you the 3-part chain under the Perforate Artery tab, while also keeping your essentials like Pincer and Leaper. 49 Venom being a necessity across all specs, same with 40 Stealth. For the Merc Filtrator spec line, it's very similar except you're dropping your critical strike from 39 to 34 for the purpose of keeping Pincer Leaper, PA, and Creeping Death. You're dropping Slash to 29, which is the lowest you can feasibly run on the Slash spec, and you're doing all of this to increase your dual wield as high as possible to maximize your chance for your offhand to hit and increasing your damage as high as possible with it. If you're high realm rank, the Merc Filtrator is the hardest hitting assassin you can possibly run. Now for the Pierce spec, there's two different kinds of specs that you can play on a Nightshade. If you're going to be going a Lurkeen and you're going to be playing Pierce, I am a big fan of the Celtic dual version, but I know a couple of people who run the Piercer version that's incredible. 40 Stealth, 49 Venom is a necessity on both specs. 34 Crit Strike in this case works out to be ideal in both specs. Following that, this is where the big difference lies. You have 50 Pierce on one spec, that being the Piercer spec. What this gives you is the follow-up to your anytime being a massive ASR, giving you substantially higher survivability in fights at the trade-off of running very low Celtic duel. So you're not going to hit nearly as hard, but you're going to have a lot more survivability, and you're going to be a much harder character to kill in fights. Whereas if you flip that to the Celtic Dual Shade, you have 34 Pierce and you have 44 Celtic Dual. Now you give up your big form of an ASR, and in fact in this spec you don't have an on-demand ASR, you're relying on a proc or an evade to land an ASR, noting that your damage will be so much higher on this spec, being that you have access to 44 Celtic Dual and your offhand chance to hit will be significantly higher. Now for the Blades Nightshade. There's two different ways you can play it, that being a Crit Shade or a Blade Shade. 40 Stealth, 49 Venom, completely consistent across every stealther. The Crit Shade runs 44 Critical Strike. This gives you access to the ability Stunning Stab along with all the other vital Critical Strike abilities. Stunning Stab is just a 6-second on-demand rear stun. It's very, very useful and it's got really high utility. Just generally, it's not preferred over the other abilities that you're losing out on a lot of other characters. But with Blades not needing to run super high Blade spec, you can very feasibly run this without giving up too much. 35 Celtic Duel, while generally is not suggested, being that you don't have access to your evade stun, specifically under the Blade spec, it is the only assassin that has access to an evade stun in the Blade spec line. So being that you're no longer losing the evade stun out of Celtic Duel, you can run 35 and it still be very viable. I consider the Crit Shade to be the ideal utility class, whereas the Blade Shade is just raw power. The Blade Shade is very similar to the Crit Shade. with a few main differences. You're giving up that extra rear stun in the critical strike line, and you're just going for the basics that you need to have on the critical strike spec line for the trade-off of as high Celtic duel as possible, just to hit as hard as humanly possible. Last up, we have the Shadowblade. This is actually, in my opinion, the simplest of them, as Shadowblade doesn't have an alternate to slash. You're running slash at all times. Now, you do have the option of sword or axe. I would never suggest axe. I would always suggest sword. If you do just choose to play axe, you will most likely be doing it for the fun of just trying something different and new rather than it being very good. It's not a great option, but it does look cool, and some people like to run it for the sake of how it looks. Nothing wrong with that. There's just a very big difference in how it's played out. The two spec options for Shadowblade are the Crypt Blade and the Shadowzerker. On a base level, they're actually very similar, with stealth being consistent and Venom being consistent. The difference is, do you want to have higher crit strike or higher left axe? I personally prefer the Crypt Blade style a little bit more, as I think the critical strike advantage of running stunning stab is significantly more valuable than the extra damage you gain out of left axe, as on Shadowblade a big portion of your damage combos are with a two-hand where left axe spec doesn't even benefit you. Generally, the only time you're utilizing left axe in my experience is to try to utilize it for doubling the chance of landing procs, most of the time that being celerity, so you can maximize your chance to do damage with your two-hand out. Shadowblade is another unique case where you get your evade stun out of the left axe spec line significantly lower level. This allows for you to get that left axe evade stun with the Crypt Blade. So the Crypt Blade not only has access to the amazing stunning stab, you still get your amazing sword styles, and you get the evade stun. And the only thing you're losing out on is a little bit higher damage when you're running dual wield, which is most of the time only utilized for procs. I personally much prefer the Crypt Blade spec line, but Shadowzerker can work and will work very well as well if you play around that playstyle. Next up is realm abilities. Generally, realm abilities stay the same across all three assassins, so this section should be a lot easier to cover. To go down the list, I'm just going to go in the list of them as they're listed and place them on a priority list of what I would suggest. Augmentation of Strength. This, as well as Dex if you're playing a Piercer, they're both good stats, as they will increase your overall damage output and your weapon skill, meaning you're more likely to hit the target, and when you do hit the target, it's going to be a little bit higher damage. It's still not a priority, as there's just a lot of other realm abilities that are more important than him. If you have the realm points laying around and you already have your essentials covered, it doesn't hurt to throw a couple extra points in there. Avoidance of Magic is the next major realm ability that I'd suggest. For 10 skill points, you can have an additional 10% secondary magic resist at all times. This is phenomenal in not just spellcasting sense. There are a lot of enemies that will use legendary weapons against you that act as elemental weapons, and being that they're using heat elemental legendaries against you while you're vulnerable to heat, you will have a natural 10% higher resist to them. Avoidance of Magic is probably one of the best bang for your buck realm abilities in the entire game. I probably wouldn't go higher than 5, although you absolutely could. I only suggest stopping at 5 because of the necessary amount of realm abilities that you do need to have on an assassin. Mastery of Pain is another really important realm ability. It's not my preference over some of the other things, as I personally like to play for survival over damage, as in my opinion, if you never die, you always win. In this case, generally I'd stop at 5 unless you're talking about being realm rank 10 or higher, then it's okay to go a little bit higher. In my case, I'm realm rank 11 on my assassins, and I generally run 7. Now I want to make this a key note that as a priority list, Mastery of Stealth 5 should be a rush. Mastery of Stealth should absolutely be a priority for you, at least to level 5. You don't need to go higher than 5, especially lower realm rank, but this should be one of your first few realm abilities that you put points into. Next up is Purge. I think Purge is the best realm ability that an assassin can run, and I think it's more important than all the other realm abilities combined. Purge 3 is the minimum I would run on an assassin. I would never go lower than 3. However, I do think it's perfectly okay to go higher than 3. I personally run Purge 5 on all my assassins, as for a lot of classes they're very toy reliant, and assassins just aren't like that. Most of their abilities are on a 5-minute timer, which means they're able to fight very often, very quickly, not having to wait on timers very often, with the exception of Purge. But if you get Purge down to Purge 5 as well, you can fight as much as you want with the highest chance of survival. Lastly, this is your go-to for survival. Vanish is a very, very good realm ability, and it's very important to get. Once you have those 3 basics of Purge, Master of Stealth, and Vanish, then I would get AOM 5. To go over it one last time, in order of realm abilities, I would go Purge 3, into Master of Stealth 5, into Vanish 3, into AOM 5, into First Aid if you feel like your damage is fine, or Master of Pain 5 if you feel like your damage is not fine. And then from the Pain section, you can choose to either go First Aid or the additional AUG Strength. You become a lot more flexible around your playstyle the higher rank you get, but early on the key notes is Purge, Vanish, and Moss. The next thing I want to cover is resistance tables. This looks very, very complex, and truthfully it is kind of. It's essentially... In Dark Age of Camelot, every single armor type has its own resistances that it's either going to be vulnerable to, neutral to, or resistant against. While on a lot of classes it's not really a big deal to know these, on Assassins it's very, very important. This takes a lot of time, and you'll find that as you play Assassins, it will just come with playing, but it does take time, and don't get discouraged if you're using the wrong element on the wrong class early on. I feel like this is best explained through an example. Say you're playing an Infiltrator and you're fighting a Shadowblade. Now, say you decided to make a Thrust Infiltrator and you naturally are doing thrust damage with physical weapons. In this case, against a Shadowblade, an enemy Shadowblade, you'll see they use Leather. Leather on Midgard is resistant to Thrust. So they have a natural 10% increased damage reduction against your thrust damage. Because of this, it makes a lot more sense to not use thrust weapons against them and instead use a legendary weapon, which is nothing more than an elemental damage type that you want to keep in your bags for these types of instances, and you want to swap to them as needed. As you can see, Leather across the board is vulnerable to heat. The parts that change are melee resists. So for example, Shadowblade is resistant to thrust, whereas Nightshade is neutral to thrust, and Infiltrator is vulnerable to thrust. Or I'm sorry, is resistant to thrust. So in this case, playing, for example, Nightshade as thrust, every time you fight an assassin, you're going to be against someone who's resistant to your damage type, which would mean that you should always be using heat against both of them, as heat is always going to be vulnerable. Vulnerability gives you a 5% damage increase, while resistant gives you a 10% mitigation. It's more important to not be resistant than it is to be vulnerable. You'll learn them as you play, but generally speaking, chain wearers, it's best to use energy. Light tanks and archers are both using reinforced armor type, which is vulnerable to matter damage. So you want to typically run matter legendaries against those classes. Assassins are vulnerable to heat, so you generally want to run heat against them. And cloth wearers are neutral across the board except for body. So with that being said, you can cover every type of damage type through the use of 3 elements, that being energy for chain, matter for reinforced, and leather for heat. Plate is only used by Albion, that being the paladin and the armsman. There's an argument that instead of using matter legendaries, you should instead run cold if you're playing Hibernia or Midgard to adapt for those armor class types. I personally do not agree with this statement, as if you're fighting a class like a paladin or an armsman, their magic resists are going to be so high that the 10% difference that you're going to gain from, or lose rather, from using it, you're better off just running their physical damage type. Keep in mind that Armsman and Paladin plate wearers are vulnerable to crush, so Shadowblade has access to the bludgeon skill to allow for them to do crush damage with their normal damage type, which is fantastic. And Armsman is only resistant to thrust, so if you're playing slash on Nightshade, you're neutral anyway. These two options are the ideal choice. However, if you are playing a Lurking Nightshade playing thrust, then there is an argument that you might want to run cold legendaries instead of matter to maximize your damage type against Armsmans and Paladins. It's just not my personal preference. This is what your bags will look like as an assassin. You'll typically have your main hand, offhand, or two-hand of choice on the class as a physical. However, you will also need to then have access to a fire version, a matter version, and an energy version. Plus a few additional weapons that may be useful in key moments. These weapons could include things like Trader's Dagger for a form of a pet proc, or Astral Blade of Illusions for the same purpose. Stuff along these lines that you'll very rarely use, but in some instances can be very valuable. This next portion that I want to go over is going to be use items. That being potions or bag items, things that you're not actively using on your character but have a huge impact on gameplay. The major potions that I would suggest a Sin run is everything in this bag slot right here, being Celerity Potion, which is increases your attack speed by 15%. Water Breath Potion, it's the only way to keep yourselves competitive, as everyone else your fight's going to be running one, so you need to run one. Supremacy Potions gives you max of all the buffs in the game at max Delve. Restoration Potion, this has been weeded out recently as they've changed Deadhead, where it's no longer necessary, but it does still have its minor use cases where you get rezzed after you died in the field. A cleric ran by, rezzed you, druid, whatever. You get rezzed up, you're going to have Deadhead. It's worth popping it and having it there for those use cases. Omni-Regen Potions are fantastic for sustaining yourselves in fights. You pop them, they'll give you health regen, they'll give you endurance regen, two things that are super valuable on an assassin, helps you stay alive and helps you fight for longer. Speed of the Hunt, this just gives you the hastener speed at all times. You can pop it on the go. It's fantastic for just being able to play the game and get around the map much quicker. A Omni Potion, Omni Healing. This is a very basic potion that isn't a best in slot, but it has its use cases, which is very useful. I like to use this as a backup because you can get these 7 stacks, so there are a lot of charges. So if the potion you have that you're using readily runs out, you can easily swap this one on to just always have access to potion charges while you're out in the field. This potion right here is the actual best in slot. It's got the highest Delve group heal in the game. So you pop the potion and it'll not only heal you, but it'll heal everyone in your group within a 1500 radius. And it's a super high Delve value, so it will heal you a lot of health. 350 being the Delve, it'll usually heal for anywhere between 350 to 500, which could be, for a caster, for example, as much as a 25% instant heal off of a potion you can use every minute. It's a very, very good potion, but they're kind of pricey and they're a little bit difficult to get a large quantity of. As you can see, this one potion only has 1 charge, so it's kind of difficult to maintain a large amount of them. There are also another version of this potion that is the same value but a much higher charge quantity, but with the increase in quantity is the increase in price. So these, while they are expensive, they are the best in slot, and if you're just trying to run best in slot, this is your potion of choice. Lastly is the improved Draught of Shard Skin. This is a lot more complex, and I'm going to show off why it's so good here. So for this next portion, I want to mostly go over the Shard Skin potion. It's a very underrated potion in how it works, and the value and use cases for it. The most important thing that I want to talk about is the way it works. So it does damage to the enemy target when you get hit for a very small amount. It's super small, 1 to 2 damage, like almost negligible. The reason it's useful though is it acts as a spell attack on the enemy, which puts them in combat. So an example of a use case and something that I utilized a lot when I was playing Shadowblade and Nightshade is if you're fighting a scout, archer for example, or a paladin, or a friar, or a Valkyrie, any class that relies on either a stun to do damage or a stun to heal themselves, it's incredible against. You'll see in this clip right here how this scout that I'm up against here will stun me and shoot me 2 to 3 times in a stun duration with slam. And this is without the shard skin potion. And here's an example of using shard skin where I get slammed, they pull their bow out, and it interrupts them for that first tick, and therefore they only get 1 shot off instead of the potential of 3. This gets even more valuable if you fight a scout that doesn't pre-kite super heavily, because what happens past that is you'll get slammed, and then after the slam, if you time it properly and they don't run too far away, you can actually land a pincer to stun them before they even land that first shot off. So you can mitigate an entire 5-second stun off of a scout for free just because of 1 potion that costs 30 gold. Now for other useful items that I highly suggest keeping on to. One of them being a greater Metherian of health. This gives you the highest level of mythical health regen that you can have outside of combat. Cases where this is super valuable is, say you're fighting someone where you're gonna have to get away for a little bit, or for some reason you had to vanish and you're like 30% life. Well, you can always just swap this on, a little shift right click action gets it added very quickly, and now for the remainder of that time that you were on vanish timer, you've got the maximum amount of health regen possible to allow you to get back into that fight sooner rather than later. It's very, very useful. When you pop a Supremacy Potion, there are a couple of buffs that are not at actually the highest value you can get them, and the only way to get them at that high value is to use buff bonus. This is an item, it's a very cheap item that's easy to get called Star Drop, and one of the things that it has on here is 20% to buff bonus. So that plus this free Metherian you get in the King's Room, which has 8%, you swap both of these on, you pop your Sup Potion, now you have the highest values possible, you swap back to your normal gear, and it's just easy way of maintaining cat buffs possible. Lastly, you have the Book of Recall. These are sold in the Traveling Merchants. They're not super expensive, and their utility is endless. They're so valuable for when you're ready to log out and you don't want to suicide or you don't want to fight to the death to lose, you just want to get out, or if you're just traveling around the map and you're trying to get from point A to point B. All it is a recall scroll. You /use it. You can use it anywhere you want. Doesn't matter if you're in Alb, Hib, or Midland, or EV, anywhere, and it ports you back to your Bind Stone. It's a very, very useful ability. This next portion that I want to go over is going to be master level abilities. Generally, assassins can only use 2 master level lines. They can be a Battlemaster or they can be a Spymaster. With the exception of Nightshade, who also has access to the Stormlord ability. That being said, you should never be a Stormlord, as it's never useful in 99% of fights. That being said, Nightshade is stuck only using Spymaster. Spymaster, however, is a fantastic spec line, and I personally much prefer Spymaster over Battlemaster. That being said, Battlemaster does have its use, it's very good, and it mostly comes down to a playstyle. Some people really like Battlemaster due to its utility and flexibility in fights, while others may prefer Spymaster for a different type of utility and different type of playstyle. So instances where Battlemaster shines. instances where Battlemaster shines is in certain damage combos. You have access to an ability called Essence Flames, which has a proc that you provide to yourself, which allows for a 10% chance that when you hit an enemy, it will do a 137 Delve in Essence DD onto that target, which is a direct damage attack. It's a nice little damage spike after you use this style, and it allows for a follow-up style, which is Essence Seer, which reduces the enemy's essence resists by 15%. This is also really nice because you can kind of stack it up. As we discussed earlier, neither of these procs override Leaper, and your goal should always be Pincer Leaper. So in a case like this against an enemy, the combo would be Pincer, Leaper, into the Essence Flames and Essence Seer, which would give you a super high damage combo, which then, now that they're debuffed and you have the proc active, you could go for styles like your Flank Chain, as we discussed earlier, that'll just maximize damage output even higher, where you then have the chance of having a massive Delve DD proc on top of that. That's one use case where it's very, very, very strong. Another valuable ability in the Battlemaster line that a lot of people love is Throw Weapon. It's a 700 ranged ability where you quite literally throw your weapon at a target and it'll hit that target. Now there are drawbacks to this ability. One of them being that it disarms you. So if, for example, if I throw my weapon at a target this close, like I just did there, and then I go for a pincer, it won't let me attack. And I can't attack for 10 full seconds before I'm able to re-engage. Which that's very, very bad if you catch yourself in a position where you threw weapon and now you're having to fight. It's really, really bad. However, cases where throw weapon is really good is to interrupt someone that you don't expect to fight back, or following up with that, to apply a poison on someone. Let's just say that, for example, this cleric was an enemy here, and my goal was to chase them down to get the kill. A case where throw weapon could be really valuable. Another opportunity to use it is, instead of using that same thing with snare, you can also use it without the snare poison and instead use Mezz, which makes a little bit more sense, as since you're going to be disarmed, you're now able to wait out that disarm timer off their Mezz, which allows for you to then be right on top of them for the attack, which can be very, very useful in these types of instances. Back on the assassin point of view here, another ability that's very valuable is Fault Finder. What this does is, if there's a speed warp on the ground, you can activate it and it'll increase the damage you do to them by a decent little chunk, or if you're beating on a door, or it's just a siege ability that allows you to hit harder on siege stuff. Has its use cases, but it's not used super often. Another phenomenal ability that the Battlemaster line provides is Grapple. Grapple is kind of weird if you're playing solo. It's mostly used for stalling. So, for example, if you're fighting a class like a Berserker, and they used their Vindo ability, which makes it so that they hit really hard, and they guaranteed to crit with both weapons, something that you can do, for example, is to grapple them. Now, what that does is it completely stuns you where you cannot do anything, and the enemy target can still cast. As you can see here, I'm still casting. The difference, though, is I cannot use any melee attacks. It will not let me melee attack someone if they're grappled. So this is an important concept for certain class types. Another example would be if you're fighting a mercenary who uses Dirty Tricks. As Dirty Tricks will fumble you and make it really hard for you to attack, well, you can stop their damage for 10 seconds while that fades. Cases like that, they have their use cases. It's not always the best option. They can still, for example, use CL DDs against you, CL dots. They can still do damage to you. A lot of them will use that opportunity to just heal themselves if they can do so with a CL heal or something like that. So there are a lot of downsides to Grapple, but it does have its use cases. One use case that's not mentioned is for group play. If you're running with an archer, while I can't use any melee attacks against them, an archer can still use an archery attack. So for example, if you were to pincer leaper a target and then grapple them, Now they're leaper debuff for the big damage arrows, as well as being stunned where they can't do anything and the archer just gets to shoot them to death. It's really, really cheesy, but it's a great way of taking down key targets in fights that are very, very scary. The last big abilities to cover is Bodyguard, where Bodyguard is essentially if there's a realm mate that's grouped with you, you can bodyguard them, and it makes it to where they can't be attacked by any melee styles if you're near them and they're also not moving. Cases where archers are fantastic additions to this. You can BG an archer where they can't kill the archer before they kill you. The archer can just sit there and shoot them to death. Again, it's a little cringy, but it works really well, and it's a great way to take down enemies that are a problem otherwise. Lastly, you have Essence Dampen. There is a follow-up to this spell, but I think it's one of the worst things in the game, and I don't really want to encourage it. It's essentially the ability to randomly strip a buff off your character. I'm not going to go into too much detail about it, but I really don't suggest people use it, as I think it ends up just taking away a lot from the game. It's consistently been bugged where it's stripped potions that people have paid for. There's all kinds of issues with it. It's one of the only specific abilities that I think should just be removed from the game as a whole. That being said, the first part of that is Essence Dampen, and it is a very, very useful Battlemaster style. Basically, all it does is when you pop it on an enemy, it will debuff their dexterity and their quickness. What this means is it will put them down in their dex breakpoint, where they're no longer going to be at their breakpoint, so they will be casting slower, as well as their quickness breakpoint for their swing speed. So it's great against both casters and melee because it's a way of keeping them from hitting their cast or melee breakpoints. It is very useful, and it has its use cases in pretty much every fight. This next ability that I want to cover is looking at it from the cleric's perspective. So if you look at the cleric right here, you'll see his power bar is 100%. Another ability that the Battlemaster line allows is Power Leak. Now, it has some drawbacks. It's very, very good at stopping the enemy player from using power. However, it costs a lot of your endurance to do it, a very, very high amount. So in this case, if you see the power bar on the cleric, if I use this style, it cut it by about 20%. However, it used about 42% of my endurance. Now, this is where if you're going to play a Battlemaster, an additional potion that's really worth picking up is a Tenacity Potion, which reduces the amount of endurance you use when you use a style by 30%. Very, very valuable for a case like this, as it allows you to maintain it a little bit longer. That being said, cases where Power Tap is very useful would be against a Vampire who is using their power to claw, a Mauler that's using their power to keep themselves alive, or a class that's mocked and they're using their power to kill you. Think like a Spirit Master on Midgard using Mock plus Life Tap. It's really hard to kill him because he's just healing the damage you're doing. Well, if you can stop him from casting utilizing power taps, you can stop that damage fully, and it's very, very valuable. Now we are on to Spymaster, my personal preference for the master level ability options for assassins. I'm going to go over it with the Nightshade in this case, as the Nightshade can only be a Spymaster, as his other option is Stormlord, which is really bad. So as of right now, you're kind of locked into Spymaster if you play a Nightshade. Because of this, I think it's a perfect choice for showing off the Spymaster abilities. So the first ability, just going in order, that I think is super valuable is Essence Armor. One of the reasons that the Battlemaster's Essence proc does so well is because nobody has access to Essence Resists. It's not something that you can temp into a character. It's only something you can get if you're a Spymaster or if you're a Sojourner. It's only those two master level abilities, which means all archers and any assassin who runs this specific master level ability, they have to run Spymaster to receive it, or a group running with a bard or something along those lines, but generally a solo assassin's not hitting a full group, so it's very rare that they have it. The vast majority of enemies have no essence resist, which is what makes the Battlemaster line hit so hard because most people have no resist to it. This buff here, however, allows you to have those resists, which makes Battlemaster really not do a whole lot of extra damage to you. It makes it a lot less noticeable. Following that, you have the ability Sabotage. This is a personal preference for me and probably the #1 reason that I like to use it. Have you ever been in an instance where you're chasing down a caster and every time you unstealth, they turn and they try and cast on you and you have to re-stealth immediately before getting CC'd or stunned or just nuked, right? That's a common situation. One of the reasons that I love Sabotage is if you're running around and you need to stealth quickly and then unstealth very quickly, if I spam my stealth key, as you can hear in the background, it takes like 3 full seconds before you're able to unstealth again due to the natural delay that stealth has when you unstealth. So if you are stealthed and you unstealth with the stealth key, it will stop you from being able to stealth again for 3 full seconds, which can get you killed in some cases. Sabotage is amazing as it doesn't work as you would think it would. It does do its actual purpose, which is to destroy siege equipment instantly. But what I like it for is to use it as a stealth trick. So if you're chasing someone down, like for example, this caster right here, if you're chasing this caster and he turns to cast on you, you can stealth as soon as he turns around. Instead of using your stealth key to unstealth, you can just use Sabotage, which instantly unstealths you, but it doesn't provide the immunity. If I'm chasing down this caster again, I can be chasing him. He turns, I stealth. As soon as he turns around, I can instantly unstealth. And if I need to again, I can just stealth again. It prevents that little 3-second window, which allows for you to get distance significantly faster on people who are trying to use that trick on you. It's a very, very valuable asset. However, its actual purpose is just to destroy a siege equipment instantly. For example, speed warps and presence nodes or stealth detection nodes. That's the case where Sabotage is also useful, as it's just an instant kill for those siege equipment. Next up, you have the bread and butter of what makes Spymaster as a spec line incredible in my opinion. That being Poison Spike. You could use the Battlemaster's combination of Essence Flames and Essence Seer in order, and it never proc the whole fight. Whereas if you were to had just used a normal style, you may have just gotten more damage out of it anyway, and the proc didn't make an impact. Whereas Poison Spike is guaranteed impact. Not to mention that it's also essence damage, which means it's going to do very, very high damage on 90% of the people that you're going to fight as a solo assassin, because most are not going to have the debuff. A lot of assassins go Battlemaster, so they're not going to have the resists, and a lot of normal enemies don't have access to it unless they're an archer or a sojourner class. So in most instances, it's just a ton of free damage. If you test the damage output on this bard right here, while the bard does have access to the buff, I'm not going to put it up for the sake of proof of concept on most other enemies. If I Poison Spike on this target and it procs on him, you can see in combat here, it's doing 95 to around 115 a tick on this bard. 85 to 115. It will tick 5 times, and on average, in my experience, it'll do around 500 damage, give or take, to the enemy. In my experience, someone who does not have the resist will take around 500 damage from a Poison Spike that's guaranteed. The nice thing is, this isn't something you have to predict or do anything special with. In fact, generally, while you're fighting an enemy, you can literally just, while they're stunned, just drop it on their feet while you're running around. Worst case scenario, when they come out of the stun, they're going to have to move eventually. So they're just going to run over it at some point through the duration of that fight while it's right under their feet. It's a great way of just kind of guaranteeing a free 500 damage, which if you think about it, is a lot of times is 2 full swings worth of damage. It's quite a bit of extra damage that you just gain for free that you can drop just about every fight with how short of a cooldown it has. It's a fantastic ability that I highly recommend. Lastly, this is the only other ability that I think is super valuable. I will say its value has become a lot less useful now that there are poison remedy potions that you can just run, but I still really like it. It's a 5-minute recast instant dot cure. A lot of cases where it's useful is if you're fighting, for example, a necromancer on Alb that casts their very high damage dot on you. That cast can just be mitigated completely off this cast. Following that, a Mentalist that uses his mana dot, same thing. Warlock using Doom. For a Warlock to land Doom, they have to cast 4 dots in a consecutive order. Utilizing their uninterruptible cast as well as concentration, they can get all 4 off while standing right there in front of you. If you can disrupt that by using this cure while you're fighting them, it will prevent them from getting the Doom off to begin with, and you can mitigate so much damage utilizing this poison if you cure at the right time. This oftentimes saves my Purge and allows me to use Purge on things that I much prefer to use it on. Secondly, you can also just run a Poison Remedy potion, which does the same effect, however it puts you on a potion timer, whereas this has no external use timer that it puts you on. I really enjoy this ability, and I use it quite often. Another nice advantage to it is if you do run into a stealther who has Poison Spike, while you have resist to it, you can always just cure it with Consume Venom. And suddenly there's no damage taken by it, whereas most people don't cure it, so they get to eat the damage while you didn't. Because you took the time to learn how Poison Spike works, and now you have an advantage over them of possibly as much as 500 damage in any fight. At the end of the day, it doesn't really matter which you decide to go with. Battlemaster is fantastic and has its own playstyle built around it, and so is Spymaster. I personally find Spymaster to fit my playstyle best, and it's what I choose to run, but there are lots of incredible assassin players that swear by Battlemaster, and there's nothing wrong with either of them. They're both fantastic choices. Let's also take a look at champion level abilities. I typically run the same champion level abilities across all 3 assassins, as I think that there are a few key abilities that really do just shine. I typically prioritize getting Damage Ward. It's a free 3 melee absorption, which is pretty nice. It's just a little bit of extra damage mitigation for yourself that you're always able to have active. I always try to get the 1 point cost group heal, as in between fights it can be a way to maintain keeping your life high so you can get into that next fight a little bit faster. Lastly, I like the parry buff. I have found that in a lot of cases, survivability is more important than anything, and if you can get an additional 11% chance to parry, that's not like most other abilities where it's a little bit of damage mitigation. You completely stopped the entire amount of damage from that parry, and there's a chance, even though it's only 11%, that you could parry 3 or 4 times in a row, and you just mitigated thousands of damage out of that. I personally think that these 3 are like the 3 most important CL abilities, and the ones that I generally prioritize the most. We've mentioned it already once before, but I just want to go back. We've mentioned it once before, but I just want to go back over Purge as a realm ability and the mechanics behind it as to how useful it is. Purge is your best friend, as it's the #1 most important factor when you're fighting someone to know you're going to survive. The best case scenario when you're fighting someone is to watch them purge a pincer. Pincer's a short duration stun, which means if they blow Purge on it, you know that you can always get away with a Mezz. It's very important to keep that in mind when you're playing, and to not, out of habit, purge the stun yourself. Because you'll find that in a lot of assassin fights, the best assassins are the one that eat the pincer and the leaper. It's much better to eat that pincer and leaper than to blow Purge on it and then win the fight, and now they just mezz you and run away. Now you don't have Purge for that, getting the upper hand on that pincer, and from that point forward, they can always escape you through a mezz. You just want to be very careful and hold on to your Purge as much as possible against other assassins. That being said, if you ever see a Purge being used, it should always be something you're keeping a mental note of. If someone uses Purge, that's a note that if someone uses Purge, that should be an instant light bulb effect in your head that you can then utilize a stun to kill a target. A common use case of this is if you're fighting a character that has access to Ignore Pain, the realm ability that heals them up by around 50% depending on their spec. Oftentimes you'll find that most people don't want to blow IP unless they're under a certain threshold. However, if you can get them to blow Purge on a pincer, then as you're fighting, if you can get them to like 35%, you can really utilize a long stun on a target and kill them in stun while they still have Ignore Pain up by utilizing the fact that they blew Purge on your pincer. They have no Purge for a long stun. They have to eat that full damage combo the whole duration of that stun. It can be a very valuable tool, and Purge as a realm ability should be one of the abilities you're keeping an eye on the most as an assassin, and trying to use as little as possible and using it when you truly need it. In this initial clip, you'll see two perspectives fighting. This would be from the perspective of an assassin, while also being from the perspective of the enemy that you would be fighting. Now, there's a lot of misconceptions around how movement works in this game and how lag works in this game. This is what two perspectives would look like fighting in the exact same fight. So if we start the clip, you'll see there's a very clear difference, whereas the Infiltrator can move to the side of the target, and there's a time delay between when the enemy character catches up to him in his stick position. And you'll see that as the Infiltrator runs, he can run in a way where he's almost always either to his side or to his back, which allows for him to hit positionals in a special kind of way. Now, to see that same exact clip from the other side, this is what you would see if you were looking at it from the enemy perspective. Now you'll notice, and I'm sure a lot of people have seen this in gameplay, where they're fighting someone and they're getting hit with a side style where they're looking at that target standing right in front of them. That's caused by the delay in the lag between the client side and the server side. And this is what you're seeing right here from the cleric's perspective in this case. Now, following that, this is what it would look like if you were doing that exact same scenario, but you were actually using styles and you were actually trying to hit side styles. You'll see that they can consistently be hit by a target that's stuck to them, who's moving in that way. Now, flipping that to the Infiltrator perspective, you can also see it from rear styles. As you can see here, the lag in the gameplay allows for you to very easily land a rear stun or a rear style over and over and over again by just running through them and then hitting it. Now, to see that same sort of perspective from the Infiltrator, from the Cleric side, it looks like this guy is standing right in front of me, yet hitting me from the side over and over again. Again, this isn't cheating or anything along those lines. This is simple lag between the gameplay. This next portion of the video is going to be focused around charges as well as template mechanics. There's a very crucial element in this game, and that's based around charges. It's something that has kind of changed as the years have went on, and some people love it, some people hate it, but it's one of the biggest reasons that enemies and players nowadays are so strong. There are a couple of effects that can be templated into almost any template, and should be in almost every template. I'm going to go over a couple of them, those being both active charges, meaning charges you're going to be popping while you're fighting and used in certain niche cases, whereas other items that are passive charges that you want to try and keep up as much as possible. This first charge I want to go over is very, very important. It's a melee resistance charge. What it does is you activate it before you plan on going into combat. It lasts a full 10 minutes, and it increases your melee resist by 10% across the board. Now keep in mind, cap resist is 26% before you go into overcaps, and if you look at my character here, I am at 26% across the board. However, these charges go over your caps. So for example, if you were to activate this charge, you'll see I'm now at 36% across the board before I go over into my racials or anything. This is a fantastic way of just simply mitigating 10% to all melee damage. It's fantastic, and you should try and keep this up as much as possible. An important keynote to use is that these items have a 15-minute reuse. There are versions of them that have a shorter timer, being 12.5 minutes. That would be the Belts of the Vigilant, Adept, Curative, Mighty, and Arcane. Those belts have a 12.5 minute reuse, which means if you can find a way to get 25% spell duration, you can actually maintain permanent uptime with that charge. Next up is going to be a boon charge. A boon charge is really simple. It's just a flat 4% to your armor and health for a full 10-minute duration. As you can see here, the reuse timer is 10 minutes, which means this is another charge that could, in theory, be kept up permanently. The next charge I want to cover is going to be a magic charge. This is very similar to the melee charge that we just discussed. However, instead of it being 10 all melee, it's 10 all magic, and as a secondary element of that, it's also secondary magic resists. Now this math ends up being kind of complex, but you'll notice here whenever you hover over my resistances, you'll see it says 35% for cold resists, and then I have another plus 10% secondary cold resist from avoidance of magic. As you can see, in total I have 35 primary, 10 secondary. If I was to use that charge, you'll now see that instead of it showing 10%, I have 20%. So I have 35% primary with 20% secondary. The way the math works out is kind of confusing, but in essence, it's a very, very valuable form of just keeping mitigation as high as possible so you just take less damage over the course of fights. The last charge that I want to talk about is going to be what's known as a ablative proc charge. This is used by a few different items in the game, and you'll see it in the template links that I show, where it's not always the same item that provides it, but it is there in all templates. That's going to be your Loyal Cloak. If you're running a Assassin, will have it. If you're running Stalwart, the Otherworldly Stalwart Cloak, or the Otherworldly Hardy Cloak, they all have access to this proc. And the last one that has access to it is an older artifact called Shades of Mist. Basically, the way it works is it's a defensive proc buff that you put on yourself. You put the proc on yourself, and then when you get hit, that being a percentage chance of when you get hit, it will proc an ablative. Reasons this can be really useful is, for example, if you're on an assassin and you're fighting like a heavy, and a heavy being an armsman, a warrior, a hero, and they slam you, in that slam, when they hit you with their big damage styles, there's a chance that they'll proc an ablative, which will mitigate the damage from that next style. This is a great way of just keeping your sustain higher and mitigating more damage. In a lot of the best fights, you'll notice that charge stacking is a really key way of maximizing your survivability. Now for the active charges. These are charges that are going to be used not passively like the melee and magic charge, for example. This is something you're going to be utilizing while you're in combat and in the middle of a fight for specific use cases. The first one I want to go over is Ghostly Metal of Valor. I think if you're going to be running a solo temp, Ghostly Metal of Valor is a must-have in pretty much all temps. There are some exceptions to that. Some people prefer items like Dark Dragon Locket, which give you access to a crescendo charge. I just feel like if you're going to run a solo temp, the access to a sustain tool as good as Ghostly Metal of Valor is unbelievably underutilized. The way it works is you pop it while you're fighting, and you have to be out of combat to use it. To show off the way that this charge works, you do have to be out of combat to utilize it, but it works in kind of a unique way where if I'm fighting a target, as you can see if I add this to my bar right here, I can't press it because I'm actively doing something. But I don't have to be out of combat in the same sense that stealth has to be out of combat, where I have to pull off for 10 full seconds. You can utilize it by just simply no longer fighting. So if I am hitting a target and I decided to use GMOV, I just stop attacking, pop GMOV, and now it's running. And I can instantly go right back to fighting. You just can't actively be swinging while you pop it. This charge is phenomenal. As you can see here, it's a 5% health, endurance, and power tick every 5 seconds for 30 seconds. That ends up being 6 ticks, which essentially comes out to 30% of your life back over the course of a fight. I like to use this on a reset, which allows me to save the use of first aid so that in the event that I do need to reset a second time against an enemy, I still have a secondary form of a heal. This is a great reset tool. I use it a lot for resetting, but I also use it in some fights for just surviving the fight. Like I mentioned earlier, say you're fighting against a heavy and you get slammed. Well, to be honest, you don't really want to have to reset right after the slam because that's your window of stun immunity. So while you're stun immune, you really want to try and get a toy out of a target. So this would be a great example of a ability you'd want to pop right after the stun, so that right as the stun ends, you pop the charge, and now you have that healing going through the duration of your stun immunity, so you don't run the risk of dying through the duration of that stun immunity. Maybe you can get IP or Moose or a big ability out of that target, so that when you reset now, you now have burned a toy out of him and you didn't just waste your stun immunity. The next charge I want to cover is going to be Cursed Blood Gauntlets. This is a must-have on any assassin. It's okay to run some other versions of the Cursed Gloves on a lot of classes, but on an assassin, blood is an absolute must. The reason for it is it has a 25% instant heal that's tied to your character, and it is incredible. This is a charge that doesn't require you to get out of combat, meaning in the middle of a fight, you can actively be utilizing these abilities while you're fighting. It's a free 25% life that you can use in the middle of a fight. I want it to be an important note that's discussed that each of these active charges all have a 1.5-minute timer between each other. What I mean by that is if you use GMOV, as in Ghostly Metal of Valor for the hot, you can't instantly swap to Blood Gloves to get an even bigger heal. There's a 1.5-minute timer between each of them, so understanding that timer and utilizing them effectively is very important. A use case for Blood Gloves would simply be if you're in a fight and you just need life now. Simple as that. If you need life now, or you're at risk of dying, or you're expecting a slam, or something where you're worried about dying before the stun hits, you can pop this ability to help sustain your life in those key moments. Another important charge that isn't used as often but does have a very good use case is Midsummer's Triumphant Wrap. Essentially the way it works is it's a PBAOE absorption debuff. It's very good, but I want to bring up that it's really bad on assassins for the same reason that Pick Slayer weapons are bad on an assassin. Any form of an absorption debuff can brick your Leaper debuff. So while this is a good item, it's really bad in your use case. I highly recommend running it for the stats on the item, but I would not ever suggest using this charge while you're actively playing an assassin. Last but not least is a Harbinger gem. There are a few instances where you want to use a Harbinger gem. Generally speaking, I prefer to minimize my usage of it because I don't think that a Harbinger gem will override the use of a Blood Gloves or a GMOV charge, but in some minor use cases they can be very good. The main one that I would choose to use it for is the secondary charge, which is a 25% cast speed reduction on the enemy target. Cases where this can be really useful is if you're fighting, for example, a Spymaster who uses Mock to try and stay alive with life taps. Well, if they're already like 20 or 30% life, you can use this charge to make their cast speed slower so you can kill them before they get rolling on life regain. It's probably the only use case that I personally use it for, although there are other cases where it can be useful. In later parts of this video, I will go over a gameplay review. When I do that, I will do a sort of deep dive on why I used what charges in what fights, and I will kind of show off my thought processes to why I used what charges and when. I think that'll help a lot in better understanding the use cases for these items and why they are so valuable. In this next fight, I will actually be going up against a Berserker. Now, some of you may have already noticed from the beginning of this clip that I'm actually missing a couple of buffs. Those buffs that I'm missing being an armor factor buff, a strength con buff, and a dexterity buff. Now I am playing a thrust infiltrator in this clip, a class that gets its damage from both strength and dexterity, so I am missing two major stats. I am missing the con, which is your hit points out of the strength con buff, and I'm missing armor factor, which will make me take significantly more damage while I'm fighting. This was set up by fighting a hunter and getting sheared through the astral cloak of the outrider, and then not rebuffing intentionally before I fight this guy, just to prove the point that it's much more about mechanics than anything else. And if you can understand mechanics really well on an assassin, you can win almost every fight. And you'll see that in this fight of understanding how to play certain things and how to fight around cooldowns. It's a very important element in assassin play and how to do it really well. Now you'll notice that my goal in this initial hit is to hit him with weapon skill before he gets anything else off. That weapon skill is the most important. Now I'm just trying to go for a stun, and I've acknowledged that he's actually in charge because I did hit the pincer and it was unable to stun him. Knowing that he's now utilized charge, my next goal would be to apply that ASR from the side to make sure he's not going to do a ton of damage to me. Now my goal is simply to get Pincer Leaper off as soon as possible and then do as much damage as I can to hopefully force a toy before I need to reset. I've already used Realm Ring 5, so that is a toy that I had to blow, along with my CL parry buff. Now you'll notice as soon as he pops IP, I know that I've won this exchange, because the 15-minute time route of Ignore Pain versus my Realm Ring 5 is a absolute worth trade. So you'll see me go for a Mezz here and walk away. People like this, in my experience, the moment they see me reset, they will mount up and just run away. They do not want to fight anymore now that they've used IP, and they're not interested in a secondary fight. So that's exactly the reason I mounted up first, that I knew that I could get on top of him if I needed to. Now I notice he starts running back at me, so clearly he wants round 2. In this second engagement here, you'll see me use first aid to get to full HP, and then as soon as possible, I go for a style on him. So let's kind of see what just happened there. I went for pincer and I whiffed. Because my weapon didn't actually hit the target, the weapon skill did not land. So he was not weapon skill debuffed on that initial hit, where when he landed side stun on me, he used Vindo and Bane Spike knowing he wasn't weapon skilled, hoping to kill me in that stun. So being that I saw that I didn't land the weapon skill on that first hit due to a miss, I instantly had to use Purge, but because I know he charged in that previous fight and it hasn't been a full minute and a half yet, even if he has charge 5, he cannot charge again. So the only concern that I have to worry about is Purge. So after I land the stun, you'll see me hit Leaper, and then I go for a side snare. The purpose of this snare is just to simply kite out the duration of that Vindo, as I cannot take him on with him being in Vindo and me missing 3 buffs. It's just not feasible. So as you'll see in this clip, he's full HP, I'm about 75%, and I'm just trying to wait out the duration of Vindo. So now, on this third engagement here, after 2 full resets, I now have gotten Charge, Vindo, Bane Spike, and IP out of this target. So on this next engagement, I'm actually looking for blood. I'm no longer wanting to reset again. My goal here is to kill. I still have Vanish, so in worst case scenario, I can escape if needed. And being that he hasn't purged any of my resets, I don't believe that he has Purge up. So going into this fight here, let's take a look at how this third engagement happens, now that I know that he has no toys up to really handle me. At this point, I no longer think that he wants to fight, so I use a strategy where I stealth blur into a backstab, which allows me to get weapon skill off, as well as my ASR. So now, even though he stuns me here, he's weapon skilled and ASR'd, so his damage is negligible. I'm not at risk of dying. As you'll see, the next poison I swap to is Swordbreaker to minimize his damage even further. And against most light tanks, Swordbreaker wouldn't be that valuable, but the side chain from a Berserker actually does a cold DD, so it's even more valuable, being that it does the magic damage and the melee damage reduction. Now it's just a melee battle. I have a whole set of poisons that I'm putting on this target. He has no way of really getting away from me. He can't really handle my damage output. Even though I'm missing multiple buffs, I'm still just able to out-damage and out-sustain him because I've utilized all his toys off of resets. He has nothing but his attacks to try and kill me, whereas I still have all kinds of poison rotations that aren't on long cooldowns. And as you can see here, we walk away with the victory. Keep in mind, this is missing Strength Con, Dex, and Armor Factor against the Berserker. As we round out the end of this video, I think it's been made pretty clear that there's so much to go into with Assassins, and there's a good chance that I still missed something. But if there is one little tidbit of information that I hope everyone takes to heart out of watching this video, is not to give up on the classes. I want to show off personally my Assassins and their stats, what it looked like to get from realm rank 0 to realm rank 11 on them, and you can see a very clear progression from every one of the Assassins that I played. This was my first Assassin that I created. It was a Lurrikeen Nightshade. I tested extensively. I played Blades and Pierce. I much prefer Pierce, being that I was a Lurrikeen. And this is what the stats looked like to get to 11. I had to die just shy of 1,500 times, and my IRS, being my realm points per death, was around 5,800. I did do some solo on this character, but it wasn't my main thing that I did. I did mostly duos and trios with some friends, and this was kind of my introduction into the classes. Following the Nightshade was the Shadowblade. This is where I started to really try and take Assassins seriously and really try to learn how to play them solo, as I correctly assumed that being able to play one solo very well means that I can play one in a group pretty well. As you can see in this jump, I went from 1464 deaths down to just 600, a little over halving my deaths from going from 0 to 11, while also just over doubling my realm points per death in my IRS. As you can see here, I had almost 50% of my total kills being solos. I primarily played solo on this guy, and this is where I saw the most improvement. Now this is my last assassin. He's still not 11, but he's very close. This is my Infiltrator. And you'll see here in total that I have sub 300 deaths at 10L5. I average around a 25,000 IRS. I do still mostly play solo on him, but I do group from time to time in duos and trios and such. But as you can see, like last week, I had 5 deaths total, and I had almost 50 full kills with 27 solo kills. These are the stats that I've been trying to maintain, as around a little over 100,000 IRS now that I'm a little bit higher realm rank, and it's allowed me to get way higher, way faster. Showing these stats isn't done to show off in any way. It's simply to show a level of progression and a hope that the people who truly give assassins a try and want to learn them get to the point where they see progression within themselves, because that is the reason that I've stuck with them. Seeing that progression from one to the next and seeing my skill level increase as time went on, it was a huge driving factor for the fun that I had of the class. Thank you all for watching this video. It's been a long journey to get to this point. If you enjoyed the video and would like to show some support, I will have a link to my PayPal in the description of the video. You do not have to do anything. This is a free video, just hoping to help out people who are in need. But if you do want to show some support, it will be there. Thank you everybody for watching. I really do appreciate it. Take care and have a good day.